Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining this session. My name is Mimi Boblik. I'm with Parents Against Vaping E-Cigarettes, or PAVe, and I'm going to be talking about e-cigarettes or vaping and the vaping epidemic that has taken our country by storm. Um, I will be sharing some information with you, but of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I'll give you some information at the end of the session about how you can reach us. I'm going to talk a little bit about PAVe and a little bit about the national epidemic and New York in particular, and how our kids have been targeted by big tobacco in the last number of years. Some information about why kids vape and the health harms around vaping, and then what we can do as parents. I myself am a parent of 3 children, 24, 21, and 18 now. And one of my kids started vaping at the age of 17, and which is how I got involved in this. I'm a volunteer, like most of our parents across the country who help us. We are, most of us, volunteers doing this because we believe that it is the way to help our kids by educating adults, parents, and other adults who care about our kids. So I hope you find this helpful. First of all, just a little bit about PAVe. We got started in around 2018, and we are basically going around the country educating parents and other adults who care about kids around the youth vaping epidemic, around the health harms of vaping, hoping that it can help prevent kids from starting, and for kids who have started, help them stop. And also we advocate and lobby around the country for changes in legislation around e-cigarettes, most specifically around getting the flavors off the market, because as we'll talk about, the flavors are really hooking our kids. And, again, we have these volunteers all across the country, some whose kids have been directly impacted, some more seriously than others. And the stories across the country that we get are incredibly heartbreaking and moving and motivational for all of us. And we are working both on the federal level, but also on the local, state and local level. So we've worked directly in New York City, for example, which is where I live, and New York State. We've been to Albany lobbying, and we have had some impact across the country with our coalition partners who have been working with us side by side. So this epidemic is not going away. Our numbers tend to lag by about a year, but it is important to know that it is still, very high levels of kids vaping, over 3.6 million reported in 2020. 2021, as we'll talk about, is not as helpful data, but talk about that in a minute. But in 2020, we had a lot of kids vaping, including in New York State. Unfortunately, New York State is no better than the rest of the country in terms of our rates. Nationally, we had between 20 and 25 kids vaping in 2020, high schoolers, that is, and then up to 10%, 11% of middle schoolers vaping. And the numbers increase as you get up in grades, but it is important to know that kids are exposed at a very young age to vaping. In New York, we have some high school data that shows that over 20% of high school kids are vaping. I think that rate was over 40% for, 10th graders a number of years ago, maybe last year when I reported it. And so again, the numbers increased by grade, but the ever vaped is 43%, which is staggeringly high. New York is no different. Unfortunately, across the country, we have high rates in various states. And now in 2021, we have data from the National Youth Tobacco Survey from the FDA, which the FDA themselves says that this is not great data to use in terms of any trends, because this data was collected during COVID. Kids were at home, stuck at home. Most kids that were at home and not addicted were likely having a very hard time finding vapes. And so the vaping rates declined. For those who were addicted, unfortunately, what we've heard is that the kids who were addicted and stuck at home, for them it was even harder, and they were more likely to vape more because of the isolation, perhaps mental health issues, and so I think they were getting their hands on it however they could. We have spoken a bit in the past, if you've heard us talk about how this got started. I'm not going to go into it too deeply, but what's important to know is just by looking at these ads, Big Tobacco said they were trying to target adults who were hoping to quit smoking and switch to vaping. But as you can see, these ads tell a very different story of Big Tobacco and other companies targeting our kids directly with advertising and very, sexy looking ads and making it very appealing to kids. They're not dumb. This was a well-trodden path with Big Tobacco, using a very similar playbook that they used with cigarettes. And, just to debunk some myths, in case you've heard, you might have read in the paper, there was a flavor ban. In fact, there was not a flavor ban that did much good. It took away some of the flavored pods. And if you know Juul or some of the pod-based devices, it took some of those flavors away. But frankly, there were 15,000 flavors available before the ban, which is a crazy number. And there are 15,000 still available. Why? Because the ban left out flavors of disposable vapes. Now, disposable vapes have been on the rise for the last number of years because they're really easy to get, they're cheap, kids can throw them away, they don't need to hide them in their backpack, they can hide them from mom and dad just by vaping and throwing them away. Also, the loose e-liquids are still available in all yummy flavors. And menthol is also highly popular, and that was left on the market as well. And if you take a look at some of these products, I just think it's important to see a picture of some of them because you might recognize them in your kids' backpacks, or if you're not, just to be aware of what they look like. You may see some of these devices around, think they're portable chargers, think they're something other than they are. They look like highlighters, some of them look like candy. But these are some of the more popular devices. They're pod-based devices, which again, has a little pod that you stick right into a device that does not get thrown away, only the pod gets thrown away, or the refillable ones where you fill it with e-liquid. And finally, the disposables, which are extremely popular. And in the past year or two alone, there was about 1,000% increase in the use of those disposable devices because of all the reasons I mentioned before. One of the things that's evolved, this is like playing whack-a-mole for people in public health, I think. One of the issues for us is the emerging products. And these are really important to be aware of because kids are really gravitating to these products. These are nicotine products that are not vaped, like the Velo and the Zyn pouches. These are pouches that are filled with flavored nicotine, pretty high levels of nicotine. Kids will put them in their mouths and let them dissolve. And what we've heard is that kids who are really addicted and can't get through a school day without vaping, but don't want to get caught, but need their nicotine fix, they will potentially use the Velo, the Zyn, or this Lucy gum, which is another, it's a nicotine gum. And so these are products just to be aware of. They are not cessation devices. These are products that are being used by kids on a regular basis. Another product that has emerged in the past year or so, which has really hit the market by storm, is non-nicotine vapes. And some will refer to these as wellness vapes, which makes us crazy because they're anything but keeping kids well. It's really important to understand these non-nicotine vapes are, not good for kids, may not be good for adults. But the thing to know is there just has not been enough, there hasn't been enough research done on these products. We do know that most of these do contain chemicals like propylene glycol and glycerin, which are chemicals that help convert the product to vapor. And just those two alone can cause inflammation and irritation in the lungs. And a lot of these products contain things that sound really healthy, like vitamin B and immune boosting. But the reality is that this is not the delivery mechanism that's healthy for kids to get all of these into their system. First of all, the research is bearing out that some of these can't even be absorbed if they're inhaled into the lungs as opposed to ingested, for example, in food or in vitamins. So we just don't know enough about them. They are still aerosolized and, so likely not good for our kids' lungs. Unfortunately, they also kind of normalize the habit of vaping, and that is likely going to be a gateway to vaping other things like nicotine and potentially THC. And here you just see, the heavy social media marketing. The companies market themselves, but also, influencers and others are doing the marketing for people with these non-nicotine vapes and the nicotine vapes as well. It really looks, very cool for kids. It's very alluring. So we just want to make parents aware of these. If your kids say, don't worry, there's no nicotine in them, they might be right if they're these, supposed wellness vapes, but they're still not good for kids. And so we'd like to try and keep them out of their hands. Unfortunately, they're being marketed at places like Urban Outfitter, which is startling considering how many kids tend to go there. Some of the reasons teens vape, one very compelling reason is flavors. And I mentioned it a little bit before. This is why we want to get these flavors off the market. And we're working very hard on the local, state, and national level to get flavors off the market, because most kids who start vaping start with flavored products and they continue using flavors. The flavors are very alluring. They're kid friendly. In addition, as I mentioned, this youth targeted marketing is very alluring. And the one of the flavors that we want to talk about a little bit is menthol, because menthol has one additional negative to it and a health harm, which is that menthol and also iced products, mentholated, iced, mint, anything like that that you see, those products tend to numb the throat and lungs and allow for a deeper inhale and a faster addiction. And so we, are particularly concerned about menthol, but all of these products are bad. One thing that companies know is that most addiction occurs before 21. So they're trying to get these into the hands of kids quickly and early so that they can have a lifelong customer again. This is part of the problem. Also, they've become very normalized. Kids will say, well, everyone's doing it. The reality is, it is an epidemic. A lot of kids are vaping. But what is important for kids to understand is not all kids are doing it. 1 in 4, 1 in 5, these are big numbers, but you can assure your kids that not everyone's doing it. And as we'll talk about later, it's really not good for them. Also, what we're hearing is that kids very often will vape to reduce stress and anxiety and potentially try and self-medicate for underlying mental health issues. But the reality is that, unfortunately, nicotine heightens anxiety, heightens depression. So it may feel like it's helping, but it's actually making the situation worse. So that is important for kids to understand. Another alluring thing about these is the nicotine rush. There is an intense amount of nicotine, which I'll mention, I'll talk about in a little bit, but it hits the brain within 10 seconds, gives you a great nicotine kick, and this is very alluring and enticing to kids. It feels really good. Another obvious reason for vaping is that they're extremely addictive products. And finally, kids hear safer than cigarettes. And when they hear safer than cigarettes, they hear safe. But in fact, these products are not safe for kids. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And one of the reasons is this. When you compare the addictiveness of cigarettes to vapes, cigarettes are highly addictive, but vapes come from, the nicotine in vapes comes from something called nicotine salts, which is a special formulated nicotine that Juul actually created a number of years ago that others are using. It hits the bloodstream very quickly, creates this big rush, feels really good. This is very important to understand about vapes. In addition, one pod or one disposable device can have as much nicotine as a pack to two of cigarettes. So it's got a ton of nicotine in these products. And unfortunately, unlike cigarettes, you can't look in a pack of, you can look in a pack of cigarettes and say, oh, I've smoked 3 or 5 or whatever. But with the vapes, there's nothing that tells you that how much you've used until it's gone. And then, once it's gone, that's about a pack to 2 of cigarettes worth of nicotine. But there's no way to understand or know how much you're vaping until your nicotine, till it's empty, till your vape is gone. Also, the nicotine salts are designed to create a smoother inhale and therefore a deeper draw and therefore a quicker addiction. So it's just important to know. Finally, I think one really important thing for kids is that these are very discreet. With cigarettes, there's a smell. You have to go outside to use them very often. When a child's been smoking or been around a smoker, you can smell it in their hair, on their clothes. And it's much more obvious. With vapes, it's very discreet. First of all, the disposables they can throw away. They can, give them to a friend to hold. And frankly, we hear about kids who keep them under their pillows at night because they're too addicted to let them go. And they'll smoke it at night. They'll smoke them first thing in the morning, or vape first thing in the morning. So it's really, really hard to calibrate how much you're using and how much is going into your system. In addition, these products contain a lot of chemicals and metals. And so you see all these chemicals and metals that are in vapes. Not all these chemicals are in all vapes, but many of them are in different vapes depending on the flavors. The ones in red here are known toxins or known carcinogens. These are not healthy products. Kids will say, don't worry, it's just flavored water. But we can assure you there's 0% water in vapes. So that's really important for kids to understand. My own child thought that they were harmless, and that they contain nothing problematic for them until it was too late, and then they were addicted. So it's really important to catch kids early and talk to them about this beforehand. Some of these chemicals are approved by the FDA for ingesting. They're in food. They're as food additives, food colorings, or food flavorings, for example. But what's really important to know is that these have not been tested to mix with other chemicals, heat at high levels, and inhale them into the lungs. That has not been proven safe. So just because they're safe to eat doesn't mean that they're safe to inhale into the lungs once they're aerosolized. So that's really important. And in addition, what happens to the vape itself, it contains little metal coils that are used to heat the liquid. Those metal coils break down, and some of those metal particulates can be inhaled into the lungs over time. So not good at all. Some of the signs of vaping are not so obvious, because unfortunately teenagers act a certain way sometimes. They're moody, cranky, volatile. And these are signs that your child might have an addiction, but they're also signs that they might just be teenagers. So it's sometimes very hard to know, but some signs to look out for are frequent excuses to go where you are not, to leave the dinner table or leave a venue, to go outside. There is also, while it's not like cigarettes in terms of leaving a really awful smell in your hair or whatever, there is a sweet smell, or a particular smell about vapes, which I miss, to be honest with you, that because it's an aerosol, it sort of sticks to the hair, to the clothes. So you can smell it, but it could be, it could be mistaken for a perfume or a gum or something like that. But if your child is using air fresheners or room fresheners or opening the window a lot when they don't normally do that, that could be a sign that they're also vaping perhaps in their room. Um, Also, just looking out, for devices in their rooms. If you want to go on a great YouTube video, there are ones, actually there are classrooms that are put out. If they're called hidden in plain sight. And basically, it looks like a mock bedroom of a child's bedroom, and it shows you where all these hiding places are. I mean, these things look like highlighters, they look like pens, they look like different things other than vape. So you just want to be on the lookout. If your child has become more secretive than usual, again, teenagers can be secretive. I have a son who keeps his door closed most of the time, so it's very hard to know. Also, the nicotine addiction, or even just vaping, even if they're not addicted, can cause changes and disruption in the sleep patterns. So if your child is having trouble sleeping when they normally have not, it's another sign. Uh, some coughing that may be unusual for your child, a dry cough, a raspy cough. Again, I missed that sign. I just thought it was a cold, or, but it did go on for a long time, and I didn't make any connection. Um, and again, just irritability, mood swings that are kind of outside of the normal for your child. And finally, changes in their eating habits. So if you're noticing your child is not as hungry, they're losing weight, they're not feeling well, they're nauseous, these can be signs, because the nicotine can cause something called nixic, which is just a loss of appetite, sometimes a weight loss. So just want to talk a little bit, because this is probably the most important to me as a parent, a bit about the health effects of vaping. Um, Basically, vaping is not great for any developing body part for children, especially the brain and the lungs. The brain basically is really wired for addiction at a younger age. Young kids' brains are still developing until the age of sometimes 20, they say 24, so 25. But up until then, kids are highly susceptible to addiction. Their addiction pathways are open. They get a really great kick of dopamine from vaping, which can sort of rewire the brain for addiction. And these companies are not dumb. That's why they're targeting our kids. They know that 90% of addiction occurs before the age of 21. So they know if they can get our kids hooked, they're going to get them for life. And so um, that's why we want to keep these products out of our kids' hands. Nicotine is a highly addictive substance, and basically they're getting this great dopamine kick from the nicotine, and it makes it stimulating. If they keep doing it, they need more and more just to feel normal. And so we just want to make sure that kids are, keeping the nicotine out of their hands. It also causes cognitive changes that are unfortunately permanent, including worsening memory and processing speed, and impulse control. Although I don't know that the impulse control is permanent cognitive change, but you may see an impulse control issue with your child if they are, having a withdrawal issue, for example. It also can cause, as I mentioned, mood disorders such as anxiety and depression. Even though kids are trying to sometimes self-medicate for anxiety and depression, it can heighten both of those. And very often substance use and mental health issues are connected. So, we really want to kind of understand the underlying issues that are going on with our children that might be causing these feelings and might, cause the impulse to vape. Sometimes people say that it helps them concentrate when they study. These are, which may be true, but over time they're going to have a harder time concentrating because of the addiction. Also, the lungs, these products are not good for developing lungs, and lungs, like the brain, continue to develop well into our 20s, our kids' 20s. And so it's possible it's even longer. And so, we've heard from many kids that when they vape over time, they have a harder time breathing. Athletes who think that it's better to smoke or vape vape e-cigarettes than smoke cigarettes realize that they're mistaken when they start to find that they're having a harder time running fast or getting their breath. This is because vaping can cause irritation, inflammation of the lungs. And, some kids may not feel it because their lungs are very healthy, but then in 20, 30 years, when their lungs start to diminish in capacity, they may start, to feel it then. And again, there's just not enough science to know the full health harms long term, but we know in the short term, these products are not safe for our kids to use. And kids with asthma, it can irritate and exacerbate asthma. And we believe that it can cause some chronic lung disease. Unfortunately, we have some wonderful young advocates of ours who have had severe lung illnesses, including one who's awaiting a double lung transplant. So this is really serious issue. Most kids will not have such an extreme reaction, but it still will have a damaging reaction or response over time to the lungs. In addition to the lungs and the brain, there are other health harms. These products are not good for the heart. It causes a fight or flight response. It's releasing adrenaline to the system. It's speeding up the system. And, that's not good unless you're being chased by a tiger or, in some kind of exciting situation. Also, you've probably heard of EVALI, which is this sort of lung illness, vaping related lung illnesses. You may have heard of them before COVID. There were a lot of news stories about it, but then COVID sort of took over the airwaves, but it is still out there. Also, you may have heard of seizures being caused by vaping. By vaping too much nicotine, kids can have seizures, and there were many reports of seizures. Again, prior to COVID, they were keeping track of these. They sort of lost track in the FDA and so on. But it is important to know that also, especially in this heightened time of heightened anxiety about getting sick, is that vaping can weaken the immune system as well. And now kids are getting vaccinated, but kids who vape have been 5 times more likely to get COVID, partly because their immune system's weakened, partly because they're all sharing vapes very often at parties and in the bathroom and elsewhere. They tend to be sharing, which means that they're also sharing germs. So what we can do, this is a little personal because everybody has a different way of handling how they deal with their kids. I'm just going to share with you what our mental health experts have told us, our pediatricians have told us, which is, first off, modeling good behavior. Parent behavior is a predictor of kid behavior. So if you do smoke or vape, maybe try and do it, outside of your children's, outside of where your kids are. And, this is a no judgment zone at all. We know this is now more than ever a really hard addiction, hard to break. We encourage, conversations with trusted adults. This can be, if it's not you, it's very often it's not us as parents. It could be an uncle or an aunt or an older sister, an older sibling. Importantly, if you think your child has an addiction or is heading in that direction, to talk to a medical professional, talk to the pediatrician or a local addiction expert. If they're having trouble at school, talk to the school and be an advocate for your child, because very often, the schools take a punitive approach. And unfortunately, that is not helpful to children in terms of stopping. Also, we're told start as young as 9. I mean, I started with my own kids at like 2 years old when it came to vaping. But at 9, kids are already seeing, in the bathroom, seeing with older siblings, seeing at parties. They're seeing kids vaping in school. So it's important just to make them aware of what's happening. So, and the health harms, to catch them young. Before they get cynical, like it happens to my kids, and they don't want to hear you anymore. They're more willing to listen to you. Know that is not a one-time conversation. We may have to talk to them over and over again and maybe find situations that are sort of, appropriate. Maybe you see something on TV, or, you have an opportunity to talk to them. It might be a good place to start. Also coming from a place of understanding and no judgment. We say no shame, no blame. Our kids were targeted. Our kids were targeted to think that these products were fine, were not harmful, and that were okay for them to vape. So it's really important for us to know that, and for the kids to know that they were targeted, and they should feel angry. And sometimes that anger helps them not vape because they don't want like to be taken advantage of by the industry. So I think that that's one place to come at, one way to come at it. Also, there's no one approach. I mean, as you know, as parents, we have different ways to talk to our kids. It's just important to ask questions, try and be non-judgmental, maybe not be so direct. Sometimes we say, are you vaping, or are you doing this? But sometimes, maybe asking a little more indirect question, what's happening at school? Are you seeing it in the bathrooms? Is it something that's enticing to you? Tell me about it. Tell me what your friends are doing. And then maybe that's an opportunity to open the door about, the health harms of vaping and why they should avoid it. Scare tactics don't tend to work. If children are addicted, punishment doesn't tend to work. So, it's just, unfortunately, the facts themselves are scary enough. We don't need additional scare tactics, but sharing what you've learned here and in other places will be helpful, I think, to your kids. This is a campaign that we created that might be useful for your kids as well, because some kids, when they understand the environmental impact that vaping has on the environment, and it's not good, then they might get angry at the industry as well. And it might also prevent them from from vaping. And it might be a way for them to engage in a different way other than the health harms. So we have found this really effective. It's been a great campaign for us, and welcome for you to, log in and use it. Wanted to make you aware before we finish that we have a conference that parents have really loved. We did it for the first time last year. It's called Clear the Vapor. It's going to happen in May of this year, May of 2022. And we would urge you to sign up. We've gotten great feedback. We have terrific panels. You can sign in for one session, for breakout sessions. There's some really interesting and helpful information for parents and anyone who cares about the health of kids. So if you want to, you can go online and you can scan this code, or you can go online and sign up for to be notified when the conference is opened. I would love if you can give us feedback, also to go on the QR code here and give us feedback, or go to Parents Against Vaping and send me a message, because we'd love to hear from you. And here's also the podcast that we have, which is very informative. There's some great content on the podcast done by two of our founders. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at info@parentsagainst-vaping, or you can email me at mimi@parentsagainst-vaping.org. And I thank you for joining this. Please reach out with any questions or concerns. Thanks again.